Welcome to Time Before Us, the channel where ancient history breathes again. Before time had a name, before the first human breath, there existed a world fierce, forgotten, and alive. Creatures of scale and silence, predators wrapped in feathers, titans that shook the earth, lives erased, bones buried beneath eternity. But they are not lost, they are waiting. This is Time Before Us, where prehistory worlds rise again, and the stories buried in stone finally speak. Chapter 1. Forgotten by Fame, 1,000 Words. You know the names. Tyrannosaurus rex, Velociraptor, Triceratops, Spinosaurus. They're the legends of prehistoric history, the poster children of documentaries, museum displays, and blockbuster films. Their names evoke a certain awe, an image instantly recognizable, wrapped in roars, teeth, and fossilized grandeur. But what if I told you that one of the most dangerous dinosaurs to ever stalk the earth doesn't appear in that lineup? Not even close. No toys, no movies. Not even a proper exhibit in most museums. It's a ghost in the fossil record. A shadow in the footnotes of paleontology. And yet, by every measurable trait, strength, weaponry, strategy, and survival, this creature could have outmatched many of its more famous cousins. So why haven't you heard of it? That's the mystery that haunts scientists. It's not that. This dinosaur was less deadly. It wasn't smaller, slower, or less interesting. In fact, it may have been more efficient, more specialized, a predator born from nature's most brutal trial and error process. But in the lottery of fame, it never drew the winning ticket. The truth is, fame in paleontology doesn't necessarily go to the deadliest or the rarest. It often goes to the most dramatic fossil find, the easiest name to pronounce, or the creature that happened to be dug up at just the right time. T-Rex had the showmanship. Velociraptor got Spielberg. But this dinosaur? It got forgotten. It didn't help that its remains were scattered, fragmented, some unearthed in regions less explored, some misidentified. Some simply ignored because they didn't fit the traditional mold of what a dangerous dinosaur was supposed to look like. Scientists would later piece together bits of this creature from bones mislabeled under other species. A claw here, a jawbone there, only realizing decades later that they belonged to something entirely unique and dangerous. In the early 2000s, a handful of paleontologists began noticing patterns. Fossils from different dig sites started showing similar traits, features that didn't align with any known genus. Massive hand claws, skull structures hinting at unusual bite force, S-shaped neck vertebrae, perfect for striking fast, and strange adaptations in the feet that suggested agility no one had expected. It was like glimpsing parts of a monster through a fog. You couldn't see it clearly, but the outline alone was terrifying. But let's pause here. Imagine being a scientist holding a fossilized claw the size of a forearm with no clear idea who it belonged to. The records say one thing. Your gut says another. And the more pieces you gather, the more you realize you're not just looking at a misidentified dinosaur. You're unearthing something that challenges the entire pecking order of prehistoric predators. Some called it an anomaly. Others called it junk science. But a few brave voices pushed back. This isn't junk, they said. This is something we haven't seen before. That's when the mystery deepened. See, the bones didn't match the classic silhouette of T-Rex or Allosaurus. It wasn't as bulky. It wasn't as tall. It lacked the dramatic skull crest or flamboyant features that usually catch public attention. But it had something better: efficiency. This dinosaur wasn't built to intimidate. It was built to win, and the fossil evidence backed it up. Unlike the slow, heavy-set body of T-Rex, this predator had signs of a lighter, more agile frame with muscles aligned for short bursts of speed and balance. Its hips suggested a lower center of gravity, giving it the advantage of maneuverability. Think panther, not lion. A killer that didn't roar, It whispered. It's no wonder people didn't notice it at first. It didn't scream for attention. It lurked in the data, waited in drawers, misfiled in collections for decades. But it was there, and once scientists started looking more closely, the reality began to surface. This wasn't just another carnivore. This was possibly one of the most dangerous dinosaurs to ever live. Still, fame eluded it. Why? Maybe because its name was hard to pronounce. Maybe because it lacked the cinematic flair of more well-known predators. Maybe because it didn't get the big museum reveal or a National Geographic cover. But in the grand scheme of evolutionary history, this dinosaur deserves a front-row seat. In a way, its anonymity only adds to the fear. A creature this deadly, almost erased by time. Think about that. A hunter with specialized killing tools, a body adapted for precision, and a brain capable of strategy. And yet, for over 100 years, it was treated as a second thought. If anything, this dinosaur didn't just escape extinction. It escaped our awareness. But not anymore. Because in this series, we're not just dusting off old bones. We're dragging a legend out of the shadows, piece by piece, clue by clue, until we can see the full picture of a creature so formidable. It changes what we thought we knew about the apex predators of the Mesozoic era. Its story begins here, not with fame, not with fortune, but with a question. What if the most dangerous dinosaur didn't need to be seen to dominate? Chapter 2: Buried Secrets. The desert sun was merciless, the kind of heat that blurs the horizon and silences everything but the wind. In a remote region where few would even think to dig, a small team of paleontologists chipped away at the earth, unaware they were about to uncover a piece of a mystery that had been buried for over 90 million years. At first glance, it looked like any other fossil find, weathered, incomplete, a jumble of bone partially fused with rock. It didn't shout. It whispered, but to trained eyes something about it felt off. The curvature of the claw, the density of the jaw, the configuration of the wrist bones. It didn't quite match the dinosaurs normally found in that region. And it certainly didn't resemble anything familiar. The lead researcher, already tired from days in the heat, hesitated. It was tempting to catalog the bones under a known species, pack them up, and move on. That's often how rare discoveries get lost, not because they're unfindable, but because they're misunderstood. But this time, they decided to dig deeper. Literally and figuratively. What they uncovered was just a fragment, part of a forelimb, a few vertebrae, and a partial skull. But those fragments didn't lie. The forearm was powerful, muscular, with an elongated claw curved like a scythe. Not the kind of claw used for climbing or grooming. This was a weapon. Even stranger, the wrist joint suggested a surprising level of flexibility, like it could twist and grip in ways most theropods couldn't. That was rare. Unheard of, even. And it hinted at a level of dexterity that didn't align with the typical image of a lumbering carnivore. Still, the remains weren't enough to label it something new. Not yet, so the bones were documented, stored, and shipped back to a university archive where they sat in drawers for years. That's the thing about science. Sometimes discovery doesn't begin in the dirt. It begins in the shadows of forgotten storage rooms. Nearly a decade later, a graduate student studying limb evolution happened to stumble across the archived specimens. Looking for patterns, he noticed the forearm's unusual proportions and compared it to dozens of other theropods. Something clicked. The bones didn't match the species they were labeled as. Not even close. Excited, he pulled records from other dig sites, older discoveries, fragments that had been dismissed or categorized under catch-all genera like Megaraptor or Neovenator. Suddenly, a map began to form, a pattern, different dig sites, different years, different continents, but the same predator. And nobody had realized it. It was like finding puzzle pieces scattered Across decades of research and realizing you've been assembling the wrong picture all along. Some of the pieces had been found in South America, others in Africa, some even in Asia. The dinosaur had range, reach, possibly migration patterns. This was no local anomaly. It was a ghost spread across continents, hiding in plain sight. The more researchers re-examined these fossils, the more consistent the features became. Massive claws, lightweight but strong frame, unique hip sockets, jaw structures that could crush and shear, and a neck designed for rapid, forceful strikes. But what made this discovery so unsettling wasn't just its anatomy. It was how close we came to never noticing it at all. For over a century, paleontology has been a story told by the fossils we find, but also shaped by the assumptions we bring to them. We expected predators to look a certain way, heavy, towering, with banana-sized teeth and thunderous footsteps. But this predator was sleeker, smarter, less showy, more deadly. It was a new kind of killer, a specialist. And its name? Still unknown. At least officially. The bones hadn't yet earned a proper classification, though debate raged over whether they belonged to a known genus like Australovenator or something entirely new. Something we hadn't even named yet. Some scientists proposed giving it its own genus based on unique skeletal traits, but without a full skeleton. Others pushed back. It became a topic of conferences, heated peer reviews, and late-night lab sessions. But the paleontological community agreed on one thing. Whatever this thing was, it deserved attention. Suddenly, this dinosaur went from an overlooked drawer specimen to a priority. Expeditions were refunded. Museums dusted off old bones. Students dug into archives across the world. And slowly, the picture sharpened. More skull fragments, more claws, a partial femur, teeth, thin, blade-like, designed for slicing through muscle, not bone. Not the bone crunchers like T-Rex, but a precision assassin, like a prehistoric scalpel on legs. And that was the chilling part. This dinosaur didn't kill with brute force. It didn't rely on overwhelming size. It killed with speed, precision, timing. Imagine a creature as fast as a raptor, as strong as an allosaur, and smart enough to outmaneuver both. The secret was never in a single fossil. It was in connecting the fossils. And that's what made this so difficult. Because unlike a full, pristine skeleton discovered in dramatic fashion, this predator was revealed piece by piece, almost reluctantly, like it didn't want to be found. But now it's out. And the deeper scientists dig in the ground. And in the archives, the more dangerous this creature becomes. What else have we missed? How many predators like this are still buried, not under layers of rock, but under layers of assumptions? And if this dinosaur, this forgotten apex killer, could slip past a century of discovery, what else is hiding in the fossil record? Chapter 3, A Puzzle of Bone Science Loves Order. It thrives on categories, clean labels, defined shapes. But sometimes, nature doesn't play along. When paleontologists first started piecing together the bones of this mysterious predator, it was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle. Without the box cover, no instructions, no image to guide them. Just fragments of a creature that seemed to follow rules no one had seen before. At first, the bones didn't make sense. The skull, or what remained of it, wasn't shaped like the typical theropod predators. It wasn't blocky like T-Rex, and it wasn't elongated like Spinosaurus. Instead, it had an almost aerodynamic shape, streamlined and light, suggesting speed and balance over brute force. The jaws weren't designed for bone crushing, either. They were built to slice, to sever, to end things quickly. The teeth added another layer of confusion. Serrated, thin, blade-like, perfect for slashing through muscle. But they weren't the teeth of a scavenger or a sluggish predator. These were the teeth of an animal that didn't just feed. It hunted, it specialized. And it needed prey alive long enough to bleed, not long enough to struggle. Then there were the claws, long, curved, sharpened by time but clearly once lethal. One fossilized forelimb in particular stopped researchers cold. The claw was nearly a foot long, not counting the rest of the hand. And unlike many predators that use their jaws as primary weapons, this creature seemed built to kill with its arms. The arm bones were thick, muscular, and connected to shoulders that suggested a wide, powerful range of motion. This wasn't just a slashing weapon, it was a grappling tool. Imagine being a small ornithopod or a juvenile hadrosaur, minding your business near the edge of a forest. And then, from the tree line, silence, then motion. In a flash, curved. Claws pin you down, the jaws find your neck, and it's over. No roar, no chase. Just precision and silence. But still, the full picture was missing. What made this even more frustrating for researchers was that the bones never came from one neat location. They were scattered across continents, found in isolation, often misclassified under other species. Some were lumped in with neovenaturids. Others were assumed to be odd megaraptorans. But no one put the entire creature together, not until someone started asking the right questions. What if those bones didn't belong to different species at all? What if they were regional variants of the same predator? A radical idea at the time. But the similarities were too strong to ignore. The metacarpals, the hand bones, were shaped almost identically across sites in Australia, Argentina, and parts of Southeast Asia. The claws had the same curve ratio. The pelvic structures matched in articulation. And the vertebrae, when reassembled, hinted at a dinosaur with a surprisingly flexible spine, not serpentine, but agile enough to twist, mid-run or pivot during a chase. The fossil puzzle was coming together, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Crucial breakthrough came from CT scans. Museums across the world began re-examining previously shelved fossils using advanced imaging tech. One skull fragment, long thought to be from a juvenile allosauride, revealed internal sinuses and brain cavity patterns inconsistent with its original classification. In fact, it matched another piece found 6,000 miles away. Two bones, once thought unrelated, were now linked by their internal architecture, as if two pieces of a shattered mask were finally aligned. Suddenly, a picture emerged. Not just of a dinosaur, but of a design. This predator wasn't a clumsy brute. It was optimized. Lightweight bones for speed. Dense muscle attachments for power. Large nasal passages possibly for acute smell. Stereoscopic vision, eyes angled just enough forward to track prey depth, like modern-day birds of prey. And that's no coincidence, because as scientists mapped its skeleton, one chilling comparison kept surfacing. Birds of prey, raptors, owls, hawks, creatures that hunt with strategy, silence, and death from above. This dinosaur might not have flown, but it shared something far more disturbing: efficiency. One paleontologist wrote, "If this thing had feathers, it would have been the Mesozoic's version of a nightmare eagle." Even the tail showed signs of advanced design. It wasn't just a balance tool. It may have acted as a stabilizer in high-speed chases, like a cheetah's tail. Combined with its center of gravity and posture, it likely moved low to the ground, fast and quiet, capable of sprint bursts or sudden lunges. But for all its precision, one question lingered. What was this thing called? Names are powerful in science. They shape perception, influence funding, create legacies. But this dinosaur's identity was fractured. Some wanted to label it under the Megaraptor clade, a group already poorly understood and vaguely defined. Others insisted it was a separate genus entirely, deserving of a new name, new classification, and its own place on the evolutionary tree. Until consensus is reached, it exists in limbo. A monster built from fragments. A predator without a proper name, but sometimes Mystery makes the story more compelling, because this dinosaur, this puzzle made of blades and bone, didn't need a name to be terrifying. Its legacy was already etched into every fossilized claw, every mistaken tooth, every misfiled limb in museum drawers across the globe. And with every new piece added to the puzzle, the image becomes clearer. And far more frightening. What kind of world gave rise to such a predator? What conditions forged something so silent, so specialized, and yet so forgotten? We'll find out soon. But for now, the pieces are in place. The bones are speaking. Chapter 4. Born to hunt, some dinosaurs were generalists. They scavenged when they could, hunted when they had to, and adapted as needed. But not this one. From claw to skull to spine. This creature was born to hunt, and not just any prey, but prey that could run, kick, and fight back. You don't evolve into a killing machine by accident. Nature doesn't hand out lethality without reason. Every edge must be earned. Every feature must be tested across generations, refined by struggle, sharpened by survival. And this dinosaur? It was the result of a relentless, unforgiving arms race. Let's start with the skull, not the biggest, but proportioned for speed and precision. The snout was long and narrow, reducing weight. This wasn't built for brute chomping like T-Rex. It was designed for slashing, for opening wounds that would bleed out prey quickly. The jaw structure suggested fast strikes, likely snapping forward with a whipping motion. Its teeth? Thin and curved backward like fishhooks, perfect for gripping flesh and pulling it deeper into the throat with every movement. Now move down to the neck. You'd expect a predator of this size to have a thick, rigid neck for supporting the skull, but instead, it was cyst-shaped and highly flexible. That's not an accident. A flexible neck means one thing: range of motion. The kind of quick, precise mobility needed for ambush strikes. It could whip left or right in an instant, a blur of motion. 1 second, nothing. The next, a kill shot. But the arms, that's where things get especially unsettling. Most large theropods had reduced arms, or at least arms that served limited. Functionst Rex famously had arms so small, they were practically useless for hunting. But this dinosaur? Its arms were among its deadliest assets, muscular, long, and ending in claws that looked like they were built to cut through armor. Researchers were astonished by the range of motion in the shoulder. Fossil modeling revealed that this predator could extend and flex its arms in ways previously unseen in large carnivores. It didn't just slash down like an eagle. It could reach, hook, and pull, almost like grappling hooks. These were arms not meant to shove or punch. They were meant to pin, to drag prey in, to control the kill. And then there were the legs, fast, agile, lightly built, but with muscle scars on the femur, suggesting immense power in short bursts. This was not a marathon runner. It was a sprinter, a chaser, a stalker. Imagine the explosive start of a tiger. That's what scientists believe this dinosaur was capable of. One explosive leap, one burst of speed. And the prey didn't have time to scream. Its feet told the rest of the story. Long toes with a configuration that gave it excellent traction on soft or uneven ground. In fact, some paleontologists theorize that this predator specialized in forest environments, thick vegetation, limited sight lines, unpredictable terrain. Exactly the kind of place where speed, agility, and stealth meant survival. Asterisk. And the tail? Long, rigid, and heavy at the base. It functioned like a counterweight. When the dinosaur pivoted, the tail snapped in the opposite direction, balancing it during tight turns. Think of a cheetah zigzagging in high-speed pursuit. Same principle. This predator could weave through trees, leap across gullies, even turn on a dime while chasing prey. But it wasn't just the body that screamed hunter. It was the subtle signs, the semicircular canals in the inner ear, tiny fossilized. Structures that control balance were highly developed. That suggests this creature could maintain equilibrium during fast motion. A predator that didn't get dizzy, didn't lose focus mid-chase. It stayed locked in, laser-focused. Its nasal passages? Wide, complex, possibly adapted for an acute sense of smell, like wolves or vultures. It likely tracked wounded prey over distance. Not a dumb brute. A bloodhound dot and the eyes. Positioned slightly forward, not fully binocular, but close. That meant it had depth perception. It could judge distances. Make precise attacks. Strike in 3 dimensions. Try escaping that dot. In short, everything about this dinosaur screamed intent. There were no wasted features. No evolutionary decorations. Every bone, every joint, every tendon attachment had a purpose: to hunt, to catch, to kill. It didn't roar to intimidate. It didn't need a flashy crest to attract mates. Its dominance came from design, raw, brutal efficiency that made it the apex predator of its realm. And yet, it wasn't a mindless killer. Evidence from brain case studies suggests it had a decently sized cerebrum, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, learning, and possibly even social behavior. Some researchers have even floated the idea that it may have coordinated with others of its kind during hunts. No proof yet, but the potential is terrifying. Imagine a group of these things, not just hunting, but planning, watching, waiting, then striking in concert like wolves in the night. It makes you wonder, what did its prey see in those final moments? Nothing but trees, then a blur. Then claws. Then silence. If dinosaurs were nature's prototypes, then this one was a perfected design, stripped of everything unnecessary, built for one purpose: predation. No frills, no spectacle. Just cold, calculated survival. And for all that perfection, it nearly vanished without a trace. But why? Why would a predator so perfectly built for its environment become almost invisible in the fossil record? What forces were at work that kept this monster hidden for so long? The answers lie not in the predator itself, but in the world it ruled, a place as hostile and complex as the hunter that dominated it. Chapter 5. Claws, teeth, and pure power, 1,000 words. A predator is only as good as the tools it carries. In the case of this dinosaur, those tools weren't just functional. They were masterworks of evolutionary engineering. Let's begin with the claws. When the first complete claw from this dinosaur was uncovered, the team on site reportedly paused in stunned silence. It wasn't just big. It was wrong. Wrong in the way a scalpel in the hands of a lion might be wrong. It didn't look like it belonged on animal. It looked like something forged for war, curved almost into a sickle. The claw measured nearly 12 inches from base to tip, with a thickness and sharpness unlike most theropods. But its size wasn't what made it so deadly. It was the way the claw connected to the forelimb through a complex joint system that allowed rotation, grip, and forceful flexion. Imagine not just slashing, but grabbing, hooking, holding. This wasn't a weapon used as a last resort. This was the primary method of dispatch. When researchers ran stress tests using digital models of the bone structure, they were shocked. The forelimb could withstand incredible pressure from lateral motion. Translation? It could swing sideways without snapping. Most theropod arms couldn't handle that. They were more forward and back only. But this dinosaur could whip its arms like a whip or swipe like a bear, with strength and speed. The muscles anchoring to the shoulder blade and upper torso were massive. Judging by the scars on the fossilized bones, they supported ligaments capable of withstanding violent, rapid motions. In life, those arms must have been terrifying, not just long and sharp, but incredibly fast. One slash, and a prey animal could be gutted before it even realized it was being hunted. And then, the teeth. If the claws were the blades, the teeth were the finishing tools. These weren't the blunt, bone-crushing teeth of T-Rex. They weren't meant to crush skulls. These were precision instruments, narrow, backward curved, and finely serrated. Think of a row of steak knives, perfectly aligned, honed to an edge. When a bite landed, the teeth didn't just puncture. They sliced. The curved design meant that any struggle only drove the flesh further into the dinosaur's mouth. Prey couldn't pull away. Doing so would only make the wound deeper. The more you fought, the faster you bled. Worse yet, the spacing between the teeth was close enough to prevent escape, but wide enough to ensure deep penetration into muscle and tendon. If this predator got its jaws around a vital area, neck, belly, leg, it was over. Paleontologists suspect the jaws were less about crushing and more about inflicting massive trauma quickly. A kill by 1,000 cuts. Approach, strike, bleed, follow, strike again. But it wasn't just how these weapons looked. It was how they worked together. Unlike many predators that relied on one dominant feature, the jaws of a T-Rex, the slashing toe claw of a Velociraptor, the sheer bulk of a Giganotosaurus, this dinosaur was a fusion of multiple deadly systems. It didn't have a single signature move. It had options that it could chase, strike, grapple, bite, and even retreat, only to re-engage with new angles. That made it unpredictable, lethal in multiple dimensions. You couldn't just learn to avoid the bite. You had to survive the claws, the arms, the leap, the follow-through. The second wave, biomechanical simulation, suggests this dinosaur could launch a multi-directional assault. Arms sweeping in from either side, jaws striking forward, legs bracing for balance, tail acting as a counterweight. It was a full-body weapon. System, even the feet weren't ordinary. Fossilized foot claws, though less dramatic than the hand claws, were still formidable. Sharp, curved, and possibly used for pinning down prey. Think of how birds of prey use their talons not to kill instantly, but to immobilize their catch while tearing it apart. This dinosaur may have done the same. Pin with the feet, slash with the claws, bite when the target was down. That layered attack style? Devastating. Prey animals likely had little chance once contact was made. But here's the twist. None of this was flashy dot. There were no showy crests, no colorful frills, as far as we know, no towering silhouette meant to intimidate rivals. Everything about this dinosaur's body was tuned for function over flair. It wasn't designed to posture. It was designed to succeed, quietly, quickly, and that might be why it's been overlooked for so long. It didn't fit the traditional movie villain mold. It wasn't a swaggering giant with thunderous feet. It wasn't dramatic enough to headline a documentary. It was silent, efficient, surgical dot, which in a way made it even more dangerous. You'd never see it coming. Even the bones reflect this lack of spectacle. They're dense where needed, hollowed where weight could be. Spared. The skull isn't menacing in size, but balanced for movement. The claws don't scream for attention until you realize what they did. And now, with every fossil examined, the picture becomes clearer. This wasn't just a dinosaur with dangerous features. It was a weaponized organism, every part of it contributed to a single purpose: to kill better. Nature doesn't waste time. Evolution doesn't gamble. If these weapons endured through generations, it's because they worked perfectly. But then comes the chilling question. What kind of environment forces an animal to become this specialized? What kind of prey was it hunting? What kind of rivals was it outcompeting? What ecosystem demanded a predator this ruthless? To understand the killer, we must now explore the killing ground, the landscape that forged it, the rules it had to survive by, and the chaos it had to control. Chapter 6. Eyes in the forest. In the primeval past, long before continents took their modern shapes, vast forests stretched across what are now dry deserts and rocky cliffs. Dense, humid, tangled jungles where sunlight filtered through layers of leaves. It wasn't the wide-open plains that dinosaur movies so often portray. It was a world of shadows, movement, silence, and it was the perfect hunting ground for a predator. Like this dot, we often think of dinosaurs as thunderous beasts, crashing through undergrowth, shaking the earth with every step. But not all killers came with drum rolls. Some came with whispers. And this predator, with its sleek frame and tightly tuned senses, didn't just survive in the forest, it owned it. Fossil evidence places this dinosaur in densely vegetated environments across South America and parts of Australia. These weren't open fields. These were wetlands, river systems, and thick jungles where the visibility dropped to near zero in places. In such a place, raw speed and brute force meant little if you couldn't see, or be seen. So evolution gave this dinosaur the one thing no armor or muscle could replace: awareness. Let's talk about the eyes. Asterisk. The orbital sockets of this dinosaur's skull, where the eyes once sat, are large, forward-angled, and deeply set. That suggests an animal adapted for stereoscopic vision, the ability to judge depth, distance, and movement in 3 dimensions. In a jungle setting, that's not just helpful, it's essential. Imagine chasing prey through a forest. Vines hanging, roots underfoot, thick branches overhead. One wrong move, one missed step, and you're either injured or you've lost the chase. This dinosaur, however, was adapted to move through that chaos like water through a stream. It saw the paths, calculated distances, reacted to movement with split-second precision, and the size of the eye sockets hints at another adaptation: vision in low light. Think dawn, dusk, the time when most prey animals let their guard down. The golden hours of the hunt. Modern-day nocturnal predators, like owls, leopards, and crocodilians, have similarly large orbs for pulling in ambient light. This dinosaur may not have been nocturnal, but it almost certainly hunted during those in-between hours, when darkness was just enough to provide cover. But not too dark to see. But sight wasn't the only sense it had sharpened. Its nasal passage was complex, long and winding, with a large olfactory chamber. That chamber is what houses the nerve endings tied to smell. In modern animals, a bigger chamber means a more powerful nose. Wolves, vultures, sharks, they all have it. And so did this dinosaur. It could smell prey, smell wounds, smell fear perhaps. It could follow the faintest trail, stalk for miles, and wait, silent and invisible, until the moment was right. Even the structure of the inner ear hinted at forest mastery. Specifically, the semicircular canals responsible for balance and coordination were especially well developed. That meant one thing: stability in motion. Running at speed over unstable terrain, this dinosaur could make tight turns, duck under branches, even leap across logs, and land without losing control. Think of a forest cat. Think of how it flows through a jungle, its paws barely making a sound. Now scale that up to a 2-ton dinosaur, equipped not just with claws and teeth, but with perfect control. And what about its movement? Here's where things get eerie. Bone reconstructions show long, narrow hips and legs built for stride efficiency, not just sprinting in open space, but threading through tight, narrow gaps. The arms were positioned in such a way that they could be held close to the body when not in use, reducing drag through brush. The tail, as mentioned before, was stiff and counterbalanced, aiding in rapid changes of direction. But most chilling of all, the foot structure. Unlike flat-footed giants, this predator walked on narrow digits, toes tipped in claws that suggest minimal ground impact. Fossilized footprints attributed to related species show quiet steps. No deep impressions. No chaotic scarring of the earth. It walked like a ghost. Fast when it needed to be, but otherwise practically silent. Now imagine that for a moment. You're a small herbivore in a misty, ancient forest. You hear nothing, smell nothing. But somewhere nearby, hidden in the leaves, a pair of eyes is watching, calculating, moving inch by inch. Not because it's unsure, but because it knows it has time. It doesn't need to rush. It's done this before. You twitch your ear. Look around. And then nothing, because it's already behind you. Some scientists have even speculated whether this dinosaur relied on ambush more than pursuit. It had the speed to chase, yes, but its body suggests something more patient, more controlled. It likely crept up, got close, then struck with overwhelming force. A blur of motion, 1 or 2 slashes, and it was done. It didn't roar. That's a myth of the movies. No killer announces itself before the kill. It didn't stomp. It stalked. It waited for the forest to cover it, for the prey to step into range, for silence to do half the work. And that is what makes this dinosaur so dangerous. Not just that it had claws and teeth, but that it knew how to use them at the right time, in the right place, and without being seen. Predators like that don't just survive. They dominate. But in every jungle, no matter how skilled the hunter, there are others, other predators, other killers, fighting for the same prey, the same territory, the same dominance. Which begs the next question. What happens when this dinosaur met its match? Chapter 7. The prehistoric battlefield. The forest was never quiet. Not truly. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call, every crack of a branch held a message. For prey, it was a warning. For predators, it was opportunity. But for one particular killer, it was the pulse of war. Because in this dense, dangerous world, survival wasn't guaranteed, not even for the most perfect predator. Why? Because it wasn't alone. For decades, we romanticized the idea of the lone apex hunter, the undisputed king of its ecosystem. But nature rarely works that way. Ecosystems are messy, competitive, violent. And this predator lived in one of the most dynamic periods in Earth's history, the late Cretaceous, a time when continents were shifting, climates were changing, and predators were everywhere. This was not a world of comfort. It was a battlefield. And every kill was a risk. So who did this dinosaur compete with? Let's start with the obvious. Other carnivores. In parts of South America, for instance, it would have overlapped with Mappasaurus, a giant carcharodontor, nearly 10 meters long and weighing over 3 tons. Bigger, heavier, and equipped with powerful jaws designed to take down even large sauropods. But Mappasaurus was not built for tight forests. It likely dominated more open spaces, moving in coordinated packs, at least according to some fossil interpretations, and relied on size and strength. Our forest predator, by contrast, didn't play the same game. It was faster, more agile, and far more surgical in its attacks. In a confrontation, it might not win in a head-on battle, but it wouldn't engage that way either. It would vanish before a conflict began. Still, there was overlap, competition for prey, territorial crossings, and likely occasional clashes. In Australia, where similar fossils have been found, this predator might have contended with giant crocodiliforms, not the sluggish swamp dwellers of today, but active, semi-terrestrial hunters capable of charging short distances and ambushing from cover. Against something like that, speed and foresight were critical. One mistake near the water's edge, and even the most evolved killer could become prey. Then there were the raptors, smaller, faster, more numerous. A Uraptor, for example, was a toothy, feathered hunter from Argentina that some believe may have hunted in packs. Though not as physically imposing, the danger of multiple coordinated attackers can't be overstated. Pack hunters bring different rules to the table. They distract, exhaust, overwhelm. So how did our predator survive? The answer may lie in its isolation, not in the sense of being alone, but in choosing its own battleground. Fossil distribution suggests it favored regions that other major predators avoided: dense forests, wetlands, heavily vegetated river systems, places where larger carnivores would struggle to move or hunt efficiently. It wasn't just about what it could kill. It was about where it chose to kill. That was the genius of its strategy. It didn't conquer through strength. It conquered through advantage. Even in death, the fossil record shows this predator played a different game. Its bones are scattered, often alone, suggesting solitary habits, unlike the group fossilized. Predators found in pack structures. It may have hunted solo. Or it may have had territory so wide and efficient that it didn't need help. But that didn't make it safe. Let's talk prey. The herbivores of the time weren't helpless. Far from. Iguanodonts had size and stamina. Ankylosaurs had armor and clubs. Hadrosaurs traveled in groups with powerful hind legs and strong kicks. And sauropods, though mostly avoided due to sheer scale, were never easy targets. Even a juvenile could weigh several tons and land a devastating blow with one swing of the tail. Every hunt came with a gamble. A slash to the eye from an iguanodont's thumb spike. A crushed rib from a panicked hadrosaur's kick. A broken limb from a fall in the underbrush. Even with all its tools, this predator wasn't invincible. In fact, it's likely that many hunts ended in failure. Missed ambushes, prey escaping into rivers, other predators stealing the kill. The reality of prehistoric life wasn't glorious. It was chaotic, brutal, often short-lived. And then there were the unknowns. The fossil record is far from complete. For every dinosaur we know, there are dozens we don't. Creatures with claws we haven't measured, brains we haven't studied, behaviors we've only guessed at. Who's to say what rivals truly haunted those forests? Some paleontologists believe we've only scratched the surface of the predators that existed alongside this dinosaur. Partial remains hint at other theropods, perhaps smaller but venomous, perhaps more social, perhaps smarter, and yet, through all of this, our mystery predator endured. Its very existence, however scattered in the record, proves it was successful, not just once, but over time, over generations, across shifting ecosystems and rising threats. It didn't win every battle, but it survived the war. What made it truly dangerous wasn't just its claws or its stealth. It was its adaptability, its ability to pick its fights, to strike only when the odds were perfect, to live another day. Even today, you can imagine that ancient battlefield. The sound of insects, the humid air, the calls of distant herbivores echoing through the trees. And in the silence, somewhere in the canopy's edge, a shape frozen in the shadows. Watching. The battlefield may have changed, but the rules? The rules were always the same. Eat or be eaten. Chapter 8, The Vanishing Predator, for all its power, precision, and dominance. The most shocking truth about this dinosaur isn't how it hunted. It's how it disappeared. Not in the way species go extinct. That's expected. That's nature. But how it vanished from memory, from textbooks, from popular imagination. How one of the deadliest predators to ever stalk the earth was nearly lost in the dust of forgotten bones. And that raises a haunting question. How do you lose a killer like this? To understand its vanishing, we have to return to where it was first. Found not in a dramatic headline-grabbing fossil bed, but in isolated, incomplete fragments. A claw here, a tooth there, an arm bone, half eroded, misclassified. For decades, these pieces were scattered across museums and collections, often mislabeled or ignored. They didn't fit expectations. They weren't blockbuster fossils. See, paleontology is just as much about interpretation as it is about discovery. And for a long time, dinosaurs were viewed through a very narrow lens. Predators had to look like T-Rex, big, bulky, loud. Or like Velociraptor, small, fast, cunning. There was little room in the narrative for something in between. Something stranger. This dinosaur didn't scream for attention. It didn't have massive teeth or an absurd sail on its back. It didn't look like a dragon. It looked like a puzzle no one wanted to finish, and so it vanished into drawers. Its bones were folded into other genera, into broad, catch-all categories like Megaraptor or Neovenator, where they could be explained away as variants or regional types. And once a fossil is categorized, it's often left alone. Studied, stored, forgotten. It took decades and technology to break that cycle. Enter digital analysis, CT scanning, 3D fossil reconstruction, techniques that could see through the rock, that could compare microstructures between bones found continents apart. Suddenly, that claw from Argentina looked a lot like one found in Queensland. That jawbone in a European collection? A perfect match for a spine. Fragment in Chile. The dinosaur had never disappeared. We just weren't looking at it right. But even as scientists began to piece it together, resistance remained. Classifying a new genus, especially one composed of fragments, is difficult. It invites debate, pushback. Paleontologists, like all scientists, are cautious by nature. They want certainty. And this dinosaur didn't play by those rules. Even now, it exists in a taxonomic gray area. Is it a distinct genus? A branch of Megaraptor? A new family entirely? The arguments rage on in journals, conferences, and late night. Emails. But slowly, the tide is shifting. As more fossils emerge, some partial, some tantalizingly complete. The outlines of a true identity are forming. And the name, once an echo, is beginning to take shape. Still, the vanishing act isn't just about bones. It's about narrative. This dinosaur didn't fit the story we'd written about prehistory. We like our monsters big and obvious. We want clear villains. This one didn't roar. It crept. It strategized. It ambushed. And it did so in places no one was looking. Its habitats, deep forests, dense river valleys, are among the least explored fossil regions on Earth. Why? Because they're difficult. The preservation conditions are harsh. Fossils decay. Bones are crushed. The ground shifts. That alone explains why so few complete skeletons have ever been found. Even now, modern paleontology is biased toward open environments, badlands, deserts, places where erosion naturally exposes bones. The quiet places this dinosaur lived. They hide their dead. In a very real sense. It didn't go extinct just once. It went extinct again and again. Every time a fossil was ignored. Every time a drawer stayed closed. Every time a dig site was passed over because it didn't fit the mold. But that's changing. Young researchers, armed with new tools and fewer assumptions, are digging into forgotten places and forgotten data. They're finding patterns others missed. They're connecting dots once thought unrelated, and the predator's coming back into focus. But why does it matter? Because this dinosaur isn't just a scientific curiosity. It's a warning. It shows us how easily our picture of the past can be distorted, not by lack of evidence, but by lack of imagination, by expectations, by comfort. It reminds us that evolution doesn't follow our narratives, that some of the most dangerous creatures in history weren't the loudest, weren't the biggest. They were the most efficient, and sometimes the most overlooked. It forces us to ask, how many others have we missed? How many drawers hold claws from unnamed killers? How many dense forests, buried beneath cities or lost to time, once echoed with the footsteps of predators we've never even imagined? The vanishing of this dinosaur isn't just a historical footnote. It's a call to humility, a reminder that the past is far bigger, far stranger, and far more complex than we give it credit for. And now that this predator has re-emerged, piece by piece, bone by bone, it's challenging us to see the prehistoric world differently, not as a land of towering monsters, but as a battlefield of strategies, a dance of shadows, a place where danger didn't always roar. It waited. It waited in the trees. It waited in the dark. It waited in the bones. Chapter 9. Rise of the shadow hunter. For centuries, the bones lay silent, locked in stone, misidentified, misunderstood. But now they're talking, piece by piece. The profile of this predator, this elusive, unnamed killer, is being assembled from global fragments like a ghost slowly emerging from the mist. And with each discovery, one thing is becoming crystal clear. This dinosaur didn't just vanish. It was waiting to be found again. This is the rise of the shadow hunter. It began not with a roar, but a whisper. A single fossil re-examined. A claw, long labeled as a dromaeosaurid, turned out to be different, too long, too thick, too curved. And when a young researcher in Argentina noticed a similar morphology in a specimen from a museum across the globe, it triggered something rare in paleontology, a reawakening. Soon, other institutions were checking their collections. Forgotten drawers were opened. CT scans of old finds lit up new details. Blood vessel patterns, growth rings, muscle attachment scars. Patterns that didn't fit known genera. Patterns that repeated across continents. How could fossils found in South America, Australia, and even Southeast Asia share such striking similarities? It was as if a single predator, or a tightly related group, had once ranged far more widely than anyone had believed. A global ghost, hiding in plain sight. But why hadn't we seen it before? Because for years, the pieces were scattered. In space, in time, and in thought. One fragment was called Australopithecus, another Velociraptor, another lumped in with Megaraptor. Each discovery treated as an odd outlier, an evolutionary misfit. But now, the paradigm is shifting. What if they weren't misfits at all? What if they were members of a hidden dynasty? A whole group of predatory dinosaurs we had badly underestimated. Some scientists now believe this predator, or its close relatives, may represent an entirely distinct branch of theropods. Long-armed, fast-moving, lightly built killers with unparalleled reach and precision. Predators that evolved not to overpower their prey, but to outthink, outmove, and outsurvive every rival around them. And as this theory gains traction, the name Megaraptor, once seen as a clunky taxonomic bin, is taking on new meaning. No longer just a footnote. It's now a potential keystone to an entire evolutionary story. In fact, some paleontologists argue that the term Megaraptoran should define a distinct clade, one that includes our shadow hunter and its deadly cousins. Together, they may have been the dominant predators in many parts of Gondwana, the southern supercontinent. That's right, in the southern hemisphere. While T-Rex ruled the north, these shadow hunters may have silently dominated the south, unseen, unchallenged, unmatched. But what made them so successful? It wasn't just anatomy, though the long arms, huge claws, and agile build certainly helped. It was adaptability. Fossil evidence suggests these predators lived in a range of environments. Floodplains, coastal forests, upland river systems. And their teeth, always serrated, always deadly, show signs of wear from varied diets. This wasn't a one-trick killer. It could ambush, it could chase, it could scavenge, it could dominate. Even its brain case hints at an unusually sharp predator. The shape of the cranial cavity suggests large olfactory bulbs, smell, but also expanded cerebrum regions, planning, processing, reacting. Not unlike birds of prey today, it likely made calculated decisions in real time. In the past, dinosaurs like this were seen as curiosities, animals that didn't fit. But now they're being recognized for what they truly were. The future. Because here's the twist. Some researchers believe these predators were closely related to birds. Yes, more so than the giant carnivores like T-Rex or Allosaurus. Their skeletal features, their respiratory systems, even the hollow bones point toward avian ancestry. In other words, the shadow hunter wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a preview of what was to come. Birds didn't descend from clumsy Tail-dragging giants. They came from sleek, intelligent killers like this, fast, quiet, deadly. The legacy of this dinosaur didn't end in extinction. It took flight, but in another sense, its rise is happening right now. Because as new fossils are unearthed and old ones re-examined, the scientific world is beginning to realize what was almost lost. What was once a fragmented mystery is becoming a central chapter in the story of dinosaur evolution. And the public is catching up. 2. Documentaries, articles, debates. The spotlight is shifting. For the first time, the world is starting to recognize this predator not just as an oddity, but as a contender. As one of the most advanced and dangerous theropods of the Cretaceous. And with that recognition comes something powerful. Respect. Because when you look at this dinosaur not as a footnote, but as a fully realized organism with vision, strategy, and design, you begin to see it for what it was: a ghost, a shadow, a master of the hunt. It didn't need a name in the public consciousness. It didn't need to roar. It just needed time. And now, after millions of years in silence, it's rising. Not from the ground, but from obscurity. Its claws are sharp again. Its teeth gleam in the fossil record. And its legend is only beginning. Chapter 11. Evolution's chosen weapon across the endless timeline of Earth's history. Most creatures come and go in silence. They change, adapt, evolve, or they vanish. But every so often, something emerges that is so perfectly suited to its environment, so finely tuned to its role, that nature seems to pause. No more edits. No more adjustments. Just perfection. This dinosaur was one of them. Not the biggest, not the strongest, but something more terrifying than brute force: efficiency. Every feature on its body, every bone, claw, and tooth reflected millions of years of precise evolutionary work. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a failed experiment. It was a weapon nature chose, forged, and been sharpened for the final chapters of the Cretaceous. When we look at its lineage, the story becomes even more astonishing. While other predatory groups were constantly reinventing themselves, getting bigger, bulkier, or more armored, this lineage followed a different path. One that emphasized agility, intelligence, and finesse over mass. That may explain why, even in the shadow of apex predators like Giganotosaurus or Mosasaurus, this killer not only survived, it thrived. Let's break down how evolution built this creature, and why it didn't need to change much once it arrived. The arms that defied convention. By the time most large carnivorous dinosaurs reached their peak, something curious had happened. Their arms were shrinking. Tyrannosaurus rex had famously puny forelimbs, vestigial tools that were no longer crucial to the kill. Instead, it relied on its massive skull and crushing jaws. But this predator, the Megaraptoran lineage, went in the opposite direction. Its arms were long, almost unnervingly so. Some species had arms that stretched nearly as long as their legs, ending in three-fingered hands tipped with enormous claws. But they weren't just big. They were mobile. Their shoulders were set in such a way that they could rotate forward and backward, unlike the more restricted range of motion in T-Rex or Carnotaurus. That meant this predator could slash in wide arcs, grab with strength, and manipulate prey with surprising dexterity. Why did it evolve this way? The answer lies in precision hunting. Unlike brute force killers that charge their prey head-on, this dinosaur likely used a combination of stealth, speed, and limb flexibility to ambush, strike, and retreat with surgical effectiveness. Evolution didn't ask it to get stronger. It asked it to get smarter, to hit where it hurt most and disappear before retaliation. Streamlined for speed. Look at the skeleton. Long, slender femurs. Light, hollow bones. A narrow, bird-like chest cavity designed to hold air sacs, similar to what we see in modern birds. All signs point to an animal designed not for sheer bulk, but for speed and endurance. while massive predators could hit impressive speeds in short bursts. This dinosaur may have been able to sustain a high-speed chase over longer distances. That's a game changer in a dense forested ecosystem. Quick, explosive predators were useful in open plains, but in tight quarters, in mud, underbrush, and tangled roots, you needed balance. Flexibility, adaptability. This dinosaur could shift its weight with grace. Its long tail acted as a dynamic counterbalance, aiding rapid turns and tight maneuvers. It wasn't a tank. It was a fighter jet in a world of buses. Teeth of a technician. Another clue lies in the teeth. They weren't built to crush bone like T-Rex. They weren't serrated in the same way as typical allosaurids either. Instead, they were narrow, curved, and sharp, designed not to break, but to slice. That tells us a lot. This dinosaur didn't try to overpower massive prey. It didn't need to crush skulls or snap spines in a single blow. It was a bleeder. A precision killer. One clean slash to a major artery. One deep cut into muscle. It let biology do the rest. In the fossil record, we find prey bones with slash marks that match the claw arc and jaw structure of megaraptorans, evidence of surgical strikes, not chaotic attacks. And unlike predators that relied on brute force bites, this one likely inflicted multiple wounds in seconds and then stood back as its victim weakened. That's not just effective. It's lethal strategy at its finest. Evolution through stability. Here's where things get even more fascinating. From the mid-Cretaceous to the very end, megaraptorans didn't change much. Sure, they varied in size depending on region and species. Some were the size of a horse, others stretched over 25 feet long. But the overall body plan remained stable. Why is that important? Because in evolution, stasis often signals success. Creatures that are poorly adapted tend to change quickly or die out. But when a body design works across ecosystems, climates, and generations, nature leaves it alone. In the case of this dinosaur, its build was so versatile, so universally lethal, that it outlasted many of its rivals, even as the massive Carcharodontos vanished, even as titanic sauropods declined, even as ecosystems shifted in the lead-up to the end Cretaceous extinction. Megaraptorans endured. They weren't the flashiest, but they were survivors. They were the quiet apexes, evolving not through dramatic change but through refinement. A global predator, another evolutionary advantage? Geography. Fossils linked to megaraptorans have been found in Argentina, Australia, Thailand, and even parts of Japan. This wasn't just a regional predator, it was global. How did it spread so far? One theory is that its ancestors evolved while the southern continents, collectively known as Gondwana, were still connected. As the land masses began to break apart, isolated populations evolved in slightly different ways, but all retained the core features that made their lineage successful. Imagine that. A predator so effective that it adapted to jungles in Patagonia, wetlands in Queensland, and possibly coastal Asia, all with minimal changes. That's not just adaptation. That's dominance. Why? It didn't need to change. It's easy to assume that evolution means change. That creatures must always be growing, adapting, mutating into newer, better forms. But sometimes, what nature builds is already so finely tuned that only minor adjustments are needed. This dinosaur, our shadow hunter, was one of those rare blueprints. Weapon forged for ambush, a body built for maneuverability, a brain sharp enough to plan, to stalk, to survive. It didn't need giant jaws or flashy frills. It didn't need armor or horns, because it had the one trait that always wins in the end: balance. Strength and speed, stealth and strategy, agility, and lethality. It was evolution's scalpel in a world full of hammers. And when the smoke cleared, at the end of the Cretaceous, it may have been one of the last large predators still walking. Even extinction didn't erase it completely. Its legacy remains in birds, in claws and the fossil clues scattered across the southern continents. But, most of all, its story lives on. Now uncovered. Now remembered. Now rising. Chapter 12, Camouflage and Stealth. Silence is not just the absence of sound. In the prehistoric world, it was a language, a tool, a threat, and no predator spoke that language more fluently than this one. Most dinosaurs earned their place in the fossil record with brute force, snapping jaws, earth-shaking footsteps, terrifying displays of strength. But this one? It operated under different rules. It didn't need fanfare or spectacle. It needed only stillness, patience, and timing, because this was not the kind of killer that chased down its prey with dramatic roars. This was the kind that was already behind you when you turned around, and in that moment, when its claws sank into flesh and the forest floor soaked up the sound, you'd understand. This was nature's perfect assassin, the deadliest predator you never saw. Let's begin with the problem most large predators face: visibility. Size, for all its intimidation, comes with a trade-off. Big predators are easy to see, easy to hear, easy to smell. Their success depends on overwhelming force, catching prey before they can flee. But this dinosaur didn't chase everything. It didn't need to. In the tangled jungle of Cretaceous South America or the thick rainforests of ancient Australia, being large meant being vulnerable, not to prey, but to failure, to noise, to blown opportunities. So, evolution took a different path. It trimmed the excess. It sharpened the edges. And it produced something that could vanish into a world of green and gold. A creature that didn't need to be quiet because it was silence. Shadows weren't just metaphors. Fossil evidence places this predator in some of the most ecologically complex environments of the Mesozoic era: thick forests, river deltas, and mangrove-lined estuaries. These weren't open plains like the North American Badlands. They were vertical ecosystems, tangled humid labyrinths of life. Everywhere was cover. Everywhere was noise. Birds, lizards, insects, ferns taller than men. Perfect hunting grounds, but only if you knew how to move through them. This dinosaur did. Its elongated body helped it weave between dense underbrush. Its narrow snout and low-slung stance allowed it to navigate without detection. It likely hugged the earth as it moved, staying low in the ferns, using tree trunks and foliage as cover. The long tail, often assumed to be just for balance, served a second purpose: counter-movement. It stabilized quick shifts in direction, helped maintain equilibrium as it slinked through uneven terrain. Every flick, every sway, silent and precise. And when the moment came to pounce, the tail wasn't a burden. It was a rudder. The role of color, a lost palette will never know for sure what color this predator was. Pigment doesn't fossilize easily. Most of what we know about dinosaur skin or feather coloration comes from exceptionally rare fossils where microscopic melanosums are preserved, and we haven't found them in Megaraptorans yet, but we can make some educated guesses. Modern analogs, birds of prey, jungle cats, and forest-dwelling reptiles, tend to avoid high-contrast color. Instead, they wear camouflage, browns mottled with black or gray dark green patterns that mimic foliage speckled, or striped designs that break up the animal's outline. The key isn't to disappear entirely, it's to disrupt form. Camouflage in nature works because prey don't look for predators in isolation. They look for patterns, movement, shapes that don't belong. A predator with a striped body may appear to be part of the light, filtering through leaves. One with dappled skin might resemble the shifting shadows of ferns in a breeze. And if that predator doesn't move, you could walk right past it and never know. Feathers, not for flight, but for ghosting. We touched earlier on feathers. Let's go deeper. Feathers aren't exclusive to flight-capable animals. Even today, many flightless birds retain feathers for insulation, communication, and crucially camouflage. So why would a large theropod have feathers? Because it wasn't trying to fly. It was trying to vanish. Imagine a body draped in filamentous proto-feathers, a shaggy, uneven texture that scatters light and shadow. Not smooth, not shiny, just irregular enough to confuse the eye. Add in a pattern of coloration, stripes, spots, or broken blotches, and you have an animal whose body seems to melt into its surroundings. Some researchers even propose that feather placement may have followed evolutionary logic. Denser on the back for camouflage from above, avoiding aerial threats or blending into canopy shadows. Lighter underneath to match the sun-dappled forest floor. And here's the kicker. If megaraptorans had primitive feathers, they weren't just evolutionary leftovers. They were tools. They were stealth suits. Ears that heard like a hawk. Visual stealth is just one part of the equation. To be a true ambush predator, you need to detect prey without revealing yourself. That means hearing. Theropod. Ear structure, particularly in more bird-like species, shows evidence of directional hearing. The positioning and asymmetry of the ear openings may have allowed this predator to detect sound placement with surprising accuracy. Not quite as finely tuned as owls, perhaps, but close enough. Imagine hearing a rustle from 30 meters away and knowing exactly where it came from, how large the animal was, how fast it moved, all without making the sound yourself. In modern predators like owls and foxes, this auditory advantage allows for stalking even in pitch-black conditions. In the dappled twilight of a Mesozoic jungle, it was everything. The gift of stillness is not just the absence of motion. It's a skill, a discipline. This dinosaur likely had the muscular control to freeze mid-step, remaining motionless for minutes while prey animals drifted closer. In predator-prey dynamics, that pause can be fatal for the prey. A grazing ornithopod, focused on food, would never notice the subtle shape tucked behind a log. A juvenile sauropod, separated from the herd for just a moment, might glimpse movement. Only too late. Some paleontologists suggest this predator could flatten itself, crouch into the forest floor, lower its profile, mask its scent with mud or vegetation. If true, that would make it one of the only known large theropods to use active concealment. It didn't need speed until the final second. It needed invisibility. Until then, soundless steps. What good is a hunter who can see and hear everything if every step gives it away? This dinosaur's feet were built for silence. Its toe bones were long and slender, tipped with curved claws, not just for traction, but for light contact. The metatarsals, mid-foot bones, were structured in a way that allowed the foot to flex softly, like a cat's paw. There's even evidence that the pads under its feet were cushioned, not unlike the soft, shock-absorbing pads on a tiger. Every movement was calculated to avoid detection. No stomp, no crack. Just movement without a trace. Attack from the shadows. Now imagine the moment of truth. Prey steps closer. The angle is perfect. No wind, no alarm call. And then motion, a burst from the foliage. Not wild, not chaotic, surgical. One slash from a clawed hand, not a bite, and the kill is done. The predator doesn't linger. It doesn't roar. It vanishes again. Feathers settle. The forest returns to quiet, and a legend continues. A legacy of silence. Why does this matter? Because this predator forces us to reconsider how dinosaurs lived, not just in terms of power, but in subtlety. We tend to think of the Mesozoic as a loud, violent world. And in many ways, it was. But creatures like this prove there was also nuance, deception, psychology, a kind of intelligence that doesn't show up in jaw, size, or thigh bones, but in how an animal hunted. This dinosaur was not an accident of evolution. It was a masterpiece. Predator that could walk through a jungle and leave no sound behind. A creature so refined in its movements, so perfectly adapted to vanish into green and shadow, that it redefined what dangerous meant. It didn't need armor. It didn't Need fame. It only needed time, silence, and a clear line of sight. Chapter 13. The sound of death. What does death sound like in a prehistoric forest? A branch snapping in the distance? The flutter of birds abandoning their perch? The silence before a scream. When it comes to dinosaurs, sound is one of the great unknowns. Fossils preserve bones, sometimes impressions of skin or feathers, but never voices. Still, science, comparative anatomy, and a little imagination allow us to ask the question, what did this predator sound like? Was it a screamer like a hawk, piercing the jungle with a territorial cry? A low, guttural growl that warned rivals from miles away? Or was it something worse, something quieter? Let's follow the clues. No roar in the rock Hollywood made us believe. That dinosaurs roared like lions. That a creature the size of a bus would bellow with the fury of 1,000 engines. And while that makes for good cinema, the science doesn't back it up. The truth is, we have no direct evidence that dinosaurs roared in the mammalian sense. In fact, many scientists now believe most theropods, especially bird-like ones, sounded more like modern birds or crocodilians than jungle cats. This predator, based on its anatomy, likely fell closer to that bird-croc line than the roaring brutes of fiction, which means it may never have roared at all. A clue in the skull. Let's zoom in on the fossilized skull. Inside, paleontologists study the brain case, the hollow space where the brain once sat. But near it are structures even more telling: the resonating chambers, nasal cavities, and the shape of the windpipe. Some theropods had elaborate nasal passages, twisted, tube-like structures capable of modulating airflow. These are similar to the sinuses in birds and reptiles that help shape sound. Certain duck-billed dinosaurs even had massive crests filled with air canals, effectively using their skulls as musical instruments. Our predator didn't have a crest, but it did have an elongated snout and potentially air sacs in its skull and chest. This suggests it was capable of deep, low-frequency sounds, the kind you feel more than hear. Think of the low booming of an alligator during mating season, the kind of call that vibrates through water and ground alike. Some birds, like the cassowary, produce similar low rumbles that can travel long distances through dense jungle. That may have been the sonic signature of this predator. Not a roar, not a scream, a rumble that crept through the trees like thunder, with no lightning. Silence as strategy. And yet, there's a twist, because this predator may have chosen not to use its voice. Not often, at least. Its entire anatomy screams stealth. Its environment demanded discretion. Its prey was alert, fast, and prone to panic. A sudden call or sound could have blown its cover. So why make noise at all? The answer lies in timing. It may have had a voice, even a powerful one, but rarely used it, perhaps to warn rivals, to signal a mate, to communicate during rare social interactions. But during a hunt? Nothing. The most terrifying killers in nature today don't announce themselves. The owl is silent. The tiger purrs before it strikes. The wolf growls after the kill is secured. This predator likely followed the same rulebook. The sound of death wasn't its voice. It was the snap of underbrush, the final gasp of a prey animal, the wet thump of claws hitting their mark. The myth of the raptor scream. Thanks to Jurassic Park, many people associate raptor-like dinosaurs with shrill, clicking, screaming noises. But those sounds were invented, a mix of dolphin squeals, walrus bellows, and distorted bird calls. Asterisk. What would a real megaraptoran sound like? We can't be certain. But based on studies of their closest living relatives, birds and crocodiles, here are the most likely candidates: low-frequency rumble, a vibration-like call that could resonate through dense vegetation; hissing, used to deter threats or during confrontation; grunting, short, low calls used in communication or during feeding; clicking, snapping, not vocal, but created by jaw motion or claw movement during display. Notice What's missing? No high-pitched screams, no mammal-like roars. What we're left with is an animal that, if it made sound at all, did so with intention. Not drama. Communication in the shadows. But what if this predator wasn't always alone? We've seen hints, speculative but not impossible, that it may have coordinated with others. If megaraptorans were social hunters, as discussed in Chapter 10, they would have needed ways to signal without giving up their position. Birds today do this in fascinating ways. Subsonic pulses, low rumbles felt more than heard, body posture, raising feathers or frills to signal readiness, foot vibrations, rhythmic thumps on the ground to warn or summon. Even in the silence, there may have been a language, but it wasn't built for drama. It was built for survival. The unheard fear. Imagine walking through a Cretaceous jungle. You don't hear a roar. You don't even hear rustling leaves. But then something changes. The birds fall silent, the insects still. A pressure builds in your chest, a tremor you can't place, then a low vibration. Not from above, not from around you. From beneath you. Something is nearby. Watching. Waiting. And then, without warning, a shape explodes from the undergrowth. You don't hear it scream, only your own. Because for this dinosaur, the sound of death wasn't its voice. It was your reaction. Why sound matters, you might ask. Why does it matter what it sounded like? Because sound is tied to identity, to presence. And for this predator, its very power came from the absence of sound, from mystery, from the tuovedon, psychological fear of what you can't hear. A lion may roar, a bear may growl, but the most frightening sound in nature is the one that never comes. This dinosaur weaponized that. Silence. Became part of the forest's background noise and only revealed itself when the time to strike had already passed. By then, the hunt was over, the kill had begun, and the forest would absorb the rest. Chapter 14. A killer's footprint. Some predators vanish without a sound. Others leave behind scars. Not on bones, not on prey, but on the earth itself, because even the most silent hunter cannot hide the impressions of its feet pressing into wet soil, the imprints hardened into stone over millions of years. These aren't just tracks. They're snapshots, moments in motion, frozen in time. And for this dinosaur, this shadow-stalking killer we followed, those tracks tell a story, not of what it looked like, but how it moved. When bones can't talk, the ground can. Fossils are precious, but skeletons don't always show us what an animal did. They give us structure, not behavior. That's where trace fossils come in. Footprints, nests, scratches. These are the verbs of paleontology, the dynamic moments that tell us how an animal lived, not just how it looked. And in a few isolated sites across South America and Australia, paleontologists have discovered prints so distinct, so strangely bird-like, that they don't match any of the usual suspects. They're not from hadrosaurs, not from abelisaurs, not even from known allosaur relatives. They're long, narrow, three-toed. Lightly pressed, as if the animal that made them was moving quietly, not charging. Some of these tracks line up with the exact size, stride, and toe arrangement expected from a megaraptoran, which means we may be looking at the ghost's footprints, the shape of a hunter's step. Let's break down what makes these tracks special. First, the toes, 3 forward-facing, slender digits with sharp claw impressions. Not wide like a duck's, not heavy like a tyrannosaur's, built for precision. The central toe, the middle digit, is the longest, showing a strong forward-driving step. This is the same toe configuration seen in modern fast-running birds, like emus and ostriches. Second, the heel pad, or rather, its absence. In many of the suspected megaraptoran tracks, there's barely any evidence of a rear heel strike. That suggests these animals walked primarily on their toes, what we call digitigrade locomotion, like cats, not flat-footed like bears or humans. This posture allows for quieter, more deliberate steps. It also supports faster sprinting over short distances. Then there's the stride. Some trackways show a slight inward angle, with the feet aligned close to the center line of the body, almost like the dinosaur was walking a tightrope. This reduces noise, helps balance, and minimizes lateral motion, all signs of a creature designed for stealth and agility. It didn't lumber. It didn't stomp. It slid through the forest like a shadow. The weight behind the step, here's where it gets chilling. We can estimate weight from footprint depth, how deeply the foot sinks into the substrate. In several of the Megaraptoran-sized tracks, the prints are surprisingly shallow for an animal estimated at over 1.5 tons. That means one of two things: the substrate was firmer than it appears, or the dinosaur had exceptional weight distribution. Perhaps walking lightly, distributing mass evenly, using its tail as a counterbalance. The second option is more likely, because the body proportions we've seen, long arms, low center of gravity, stiffened tail, point to a predator. Built not just for motion, but for controlled motion. A predator that could move fast, but more importantly, could move quietly, even at full-size. Speed in the stone in a fossil site in Patagonia. A series of tracks span nearly 40 meters, each step nearly 3 meters apart. That spacing suggests running speeds over 35 kilometers per hour. Not record-breaking compared to small theropods, but for an animal this large, it's terrifyingly efficient. This wasn't a sprinter like Velociraptor, but it didn't need to be. It was the prehistoric equivalent of a cheetah mixed with a jaguar, fast enough to chase, quiet enough to stalk, and deadly enough to win. Either way, some footprints even show a sudden change in depth and spacing, a burst of acceleration, perhaps the exact moment the predator launched its attack. Can you imagine that? A peaceful patch of riverbank, footprints slow and deliberate. And then, deeper, wider prints, angled forward. The lunge. The kill. A scene frozen in stone for 95 million years. The claw drag mystery in a few trackways. Strange marks accompany the footprints. Long, shallow furrows in the dirt, as if something scraped the surface just behind or beside the toes. These could be tail drag marks, but Megaraptorans likely held their tails stiff and elevated for balance. So what are they? Some scientists propose a bold theory. Claw drag. The massive claws on its hands, curved like scythes, may have occasionally brushed the ground as it moved, either during slow stalking or moments of overextension. It's rare, speculative, and controversial. But if true, it means this predator moved with such caution that even the tips of its forelimbs left whispers in the dirt. Not crashing, not flailing. Just grazing the surface. Chasing ghosts in the rock. One of the strangest, most emotional aspects of trackway study is this: you're not looking at a dead animal, you're looking at a living one. Every step, every shift in pressure is a moment of action, not fossilization. These prints weren't left by bones. They were left by feet, flesh, muscle. By a living predator on the move. Some tracks even show subtle asymmetries, a slight favoring of one side, a stumble, a pause. Maybe the dinosaur was injured. Maybe it was slowing to listen. Maybe it saw you. These are stories, not just data. And every track is a sentence in a language we're only just beginning to read. The last steps let us return to the big picture. This predator, silent, lethal, forgotten, didn't roar its name into the fossil record. It didn't leave behind trophies or dens or skeletons posed in heroic battles. But it left footprints, dozens of them. Across continents, across time, and they all tell the same story. A hunter that moved with confidence. With control, with purpose. Killer that didn't need noise to make an impact, because long after the bones are gone, the tracks remain. And in those shallow impressions, pressed into Cretaceous mud, we find something more than evidence. We find a presence. Chapter 15. The mystery of the vanishing fossils. It's hard to fear something you cannot see, and yet, in the case of this dinosaur, one of the most dangerous predators that ever lived, that's exactly what makes it so haunting. Because this wasn't a creature lost to imagination, myth, or legend. It was real. It lived. It killed, it dominated, and then it vanished. Not in a fiery extinction event, not in a massive die-off, not in some epic fossilized tableau like T-Rex or Triceratops. It vanished in a far quieter, more frustrating way. It simply stopped, leaving behind pieces of itself. No full skeletons, no dramatic kill sites, no clean museum specimens, just fragments. Scattered, misidentified, forgotten. In the end, the most terrifying thing about this dinosaur might not be its claws, its intelligence, or its stealth. It might be the fact that it almost disappeared from science altogether. A predator without a presence. The fossil record is often romanticized. We think of skeletons laid out perfectly in sandstone, skulls grinning from museum walls, names etched into textbooks as if they've always been there. But that's not how paleontology works. For every T-Rex, there are a dozen predators whose stories remain untold, not because they weren't extraordinary, but because we barely found them at all. This dinosaur, possibly a member of the Megaraptoran family or a closely related offshoot, sits at the center of that paleontological black hole. It existed. We know that now, but barely. And the question that keeps scientists up at night is, why? Fossils are flukes, not facts. Let's start with the reality of fossilition. Most animals that die don't become fossils. They rot, get eaten, decompose, are washed away. In order for a fossil to form, the animal has to die in just the right place: a riverbed, a floodplain, a volcanic ashfall, and then be buried quickly before decay and scavengers take over. It's the geological equivalent of winning the lottery. Even under perfect conditions, the chances of preserving a full skeleton are astronomically low. Soft tissue almost never survives. Even bones can be warped, crushed, or scattered by natural forces. So it's no surprise that animals like this, who likely lived in dense, wet forests, left behind almost nothing. Forests are bad at making fossils. They're acidic. The soil is constantly in motion. Rain washes remains away. Roots twist and disturb what lies beneath. Animals that live and die in jungles usually vanish without a trace. And our predator? It wasn't a plains dweller like T-Rex. It was a creature of the shadows. It evolved to move through thick underbrush, along riverbanks, through vegetation so dense you could disappear just 2 steps in. It died in places the earth refused to. Remember, the rarest kind of evidence, what little we do have of this dinosaur, is almost criminally frustrating. A partial hand here, a claw, longer than a human forearm, a chunk of vertebra, a sliver of jawbone, a single femur, misattributed for years. No 2 finds ever seem to come from the same animal. We don't have a complete skull. We don't have a full tail. We don't even have enough bones to confidently say we've seen a single full individual, from head to toe. Instead, we have whispers. Like finding random teeth and trying to sketch the face of the killer, like hearing a single footstep in the forest and guessing what beast left it. It's no wonder this predator spent so long misclassified, shoved into broader groups like Allosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, or simply Theropod indet, an abbreviation every paleontologist dreads. Theropod, indeterminate. But the bones always had something off about them. Something different, misclassified for decades. This is where the mystery deepens, because for decades, paleontologists found pieces of this predator without realizing what they had. Why? Because its features didn't make sense. Take the arms. They were unusually long for a large theropod, longer even than most dromaeosaurs, raptors. The hand claws were enormous, curved like sickles. The bones were lightly built, bird-like. In structure, that's not how apex predators were supposed to look. Not according to the rulebook of the 20th century. Big theropods had short arms like T-Rex or powerful jaws like Giganotosaurus. But this creature seemed to reverse the pattern. Slender jaws, narrow snout, long forelimbs, huge claws, and a body that suggested speed and agility, not just masso instead of being recognized as a unique genus. It got filed away, literally filed, into museum drawers as possible allosauride, filed into textbooks as yet another poorly preserved carnivore, filed into the background of dinosaur history, until one day, a paleontologist took another look and realized, this doesn't belong anywhere, this is something else, the tragedy of forgotten bones. Here's where it gets almost poetic, in a museum. In Argentina, a dusty collection of bones sat untouched for over a decade. They'd been excavated in the 1990s, cataloged, bagged, labeled vaguely, and then ignored. Why? Because they didn't match anything known. They were too fragmentary, too strange. But in 2012, a researcher reopened the bags, and what they found stunned the community. The bones belonged to a new species, and possibly even a new branch of predatory dinosaurs altogether. A fast, intelligent, clawed killer that didn't fit into existing family tree. The predator had been there the whole time, just waiting for someone to notice. And that raises a haunting thought. How many more are still waiting? How many more killers are hiding in plain sight, misidentified in backrooms, in unscanned boxes, in half-forgotten dig sites? The fossils may be rare, but the mistakes? Those are everywhere. The global puzzle, and this isn't just a South American mystery. Strangely similar bones have turned up in Australia, Thailand, and possibly even Antarctica. Long clawed forelimbs, slender tibiae, lightweight vertebrae. Features that echo the same evolutionary blueprint, but they're incomplete. They're often missing the connecting parts, the hips, the skulls, the spines needed to make a full comparison. So paleontologists are stuck playing a global jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and no box cover to guide them. And in that uncertainty, the predator continues to elude us. Ghost in the record. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine you're a scientist holding a fossil claw in your hands. It's curved, sharp, massive. You can almost see the sinew that once flexed behind it, but you don't know what it belongs to. There's no jaw, no skull, no DNA. Just one piece of a story. You could be holding the only surviving evidence of an animal that once ruled its environment, an apex predator, a living nightmare. And yet, without more bones, more data, it becomes just another curiosity in a drawer. That's what this dinosaur represents. The ghost in the fossil record. Not absent, but elusive. Seen just long enough to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Why? It haunts paleontology for scientists. This dinosaur is the ultimate what if. What if it had lived in North America? What if it had died in a floodplain? What if it had been discovered earlier, before our biases about what predators should look like were formed? Would it be as famous as T-Rex? Would we have a dozen documentaries about it? Would toy companies and movie studios be fighting for its image? Instead, it's become a symbol. Of what we missed, of what's still hidden, and of how much more we have to learn. The silent legacy, ironically. This dinosaur's greatest strength in life, its ability to disappear, has carried into death. It was designed for ambush, for camouflage, for passing through the world without leaving a trace. And that's exactly what it did. Even in death. It left behind so little that we had to build its legend from scraps, piece by piece, claw by claw, hypothesis by hypothesis. And yet somehow, that makes it more terrifying, because it reminds us that the deadliest things don't always roar. Sometimes, they simply vanish. Chapter 16, Mistaken Identity. For nearly half a century, bones of this Terrifying dinosaurs sat in drawers, basements, and museum cabinets, labeled, filed, and almost entirely forgotten. Not because they weren't important, not because they weren't impressive, but because they didn't make sense. They looked too strange, too slender, too advanced, and yet not advanced enough to fit cleanly into any known group. So instead of being recognized for what they were, evidence of one of the most specialized predators of the Cretaceous, these bones were cast into scientific limbo, misclassified, misnamed, misunderstood. It's one of the eeriest chapters in this dinosaur's story. Because while the creature itself is gone, its identity crisis haunted the very people trying to understand it. Let's go back to where this all started. A bone that didn't belong in the late 20th century. Paleontologists in South America were digging in familiar ground, layers that had yielded abelisaurids, titanosaurs, and the occasional ankylosaur fragment. Then came a claw, long, curved, razor-thin. At first glance, it resembled something you might expect from a dromaeosaur, a raptor, but it was far too big. Raptors in the southern hemisphere weren't supposed to get this large, and the associated bones, a partial hand, some vertebrae, didn't match the raptor blueprint either. Too robust in places, too delicate in others. It was like looking at a chimera. So what did the scientists do? They labeled it as a poorly preserved allosauride. Close enough. Box checked. On to the next find. But this was no Allosaurus, and the clues were just beginning to pile up. Fitting the wrong puzzle. This was the problem. Every time a new piece of the mystery surfaced, it was viewed through the lens of what we already believed. Science, for all its rigor, is still conducted by humans. And humans come with bias. In the 1980s and 90s, the dominant belief was that large predatory dinosaurs followed certain evolutionary lines. You had your tyrannosaurs in the north, your abelisaurids and carcharodontos in the south, and a few leftover allosaurids scattered throughout. Anything that didn't fit got wedged into one of those categories anyway. And our predator? It didn't just not fit. It broke the rules. Too bird-like for a classic carnivore, too large for a maniraptor, and too advanced in some ways, too primitive in others. It was the dinosaur equivalent of a forged passport, carrying the wrong name. Traveling through history unnoticed. A hand unlike any other one. Of the biggest turning points in this mistaken identity saga came when a nearly complete forelimb was uncovered in Patagonia. It was bizarre. The arm was long, absurdly long for a theropod this size. The hand had 3 large fingers, with massive curved claws. The proportions didn't match T-Rex, Allosaurus, or Spinosaurus, the known giants of the time. This was something new. But even then, many researchers tried to tuck it into familiar categories. Maybe a weird Abelisaurus? A malformed Giganotosaurus? It took years before scientists finally admitted this wasn't part of anything known. It was a new branch of the dinosaur tree, something we hadn't even realized was missing. And buried inside that branch was the predator we've been tracing through this entire documentary. The case of the vanishing skull. The skull tells us more about a dinosaur's behavior than almost any other bone. And in this case, the lack of a full skull nearly doomed our understanding of the predator entirely. What we did find, a partial snout, some isolated teeth, told a strange story. The snout was narrow and elongated, almost crocodile-like. The teeth were small, but serrated, suggesting a slicing, not crushing, feeding style. The jaws lacked the massive bite force seen in T-Rex, but showed refinements in precision. Still, without a full cranium, researchers couldn't place it. The predator didn't have the blunt skull of a carcharodontor, nor the thick, compact skull of an abelisaur. What it did resemble, in an eerie, partial way, was the skull of early birds and coelurosaurs. But how could that be? How could something this big, this dangerous, also be related to the more delicate side of the dinosaur family tree? The answer, once again, was staring us in the face. We just didn't know what we were looking at. The turning point, rewriting the tree finally. In the early 2000s and 2010s, paleontologists started reassembling the puzzle with fresh eyes. They realized something incredible. This predator wasn't just a misfit. It was part of an entire lineage that had been overlooked. The group became known as Megaraptoridae, not because they were true raptors like Velociraptor, but because their enormous hand claws resembled them. And within that group sat several enigmatic genera. Australovinipora, Forophraptor, had been found separately, labeled differently, misunderstood in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern, and at the center of that pattern was our dinosaur, a predator so refined, so specialized, and so stealthy that even scientists spent decades calling it the wrong thing. How many are still hidden? Here's the most chilling question of all. How many fossils have we misnamed? How many bones sit in museum drawers right now, mislabeled as Allosaurus or Giganotosaurus, when they're really something else? How many predators like this one are still masquerading under borrowed identities? The reality is that paleontology is an ever-evolving field. New techniques like CT scanning, 3D modeling, and phylogenetic software are helping us catch these mistakes, but many fossils have yet to be re-examined. Many are still waiting for a second opinion. And among them may lie the next chapter in this predator story, or even its sibling. The danger of the familiar. Let's step back. What makes this story so powerful isn't just the dinosaur itself, but the way we almost lost it. Because the most dangerous assumptions in science are often the ones that feel the most familiar. Oh, that claw? Just another allosaur. Oh, those teeth? Must be a juvenile Giganotosaurus. Oh, that partial pelvis? Nothing new here. But this predator defied familiarity. It forced us to rethink our categories, reorganize our family trees, challenge the idea that apex predators always looked and behaved a certain way. And in doing so, it reminded us that the real monsters in history may not be the loudest, but the ones who quietly wore another dinosaur's name for 50 years. Chapter 17. Too dangerous for pop culture? Think about the dinosaurs that dominate our screens, toys, and imaginations. Velociraptor, the clever killer. Tyrannosaurus Rex, the tyrant king. Spinosaurus, the sail-backed giant. Even herbivores like Triceratops and Stegosaurus have made the leap into pop culture stardom. But our predator? The shadowy, clawed, hyper-adapted killer we've been uncovering piece by piece. It doesn't appear in any major movie. It's never been the centerpiece of a dinosaur documentary. And ask the average person if they've heard of Megaraptor, Australovenator, or Orcaraptor, and they'll probably just blink. Yet scientifically, behaviorally, lethally, this dinosaur deserves to be right up there with the greats. So, what happened? Let's pull back the curtain. Built for cinema, but left on the cutting room floor from a purely cinematic standpoint, this dinosaur has everything. Massive sickle claws the size of kitchen knives, feathers for a sleek, modern, updated look, stealth-based hunting style, like a prehistoric ninja brainpower that rivals or surpasses some raptors. A mysterious history, spanning continents and confounding scientists. It's not just terrifying. It's cool. So why has it never become star? Why hasn't it become the poster child for prehistoric horror? The answer lies in the strange intersection of science, timing, and storytelling. The Jurassic Park effect. Let's go back to 1993. Jurassic Park hits theaters and completely reshapes how the public views dinosaurs. Suddenly, Velociraptor, previously a little-known turkey-sized predator, becomes the sleek, intelligent killer of pop culture dreams and nightmares. T-Rex becomes the ultimate apex monster, lumbering, roaring, unstoppable. And for the next 3 decades, Those dinosaurs have remained the royalty of prehistoric fiction, by the time our shadowy predator was even beginning to be understood, let alone named or modeled. The spotlight was already taken. Worse, it didn't fit neatly into the public simplified categories. It wasn't a classic raptor. It wasn't a towering tyrnnos aur. It wasn't bizarre looking enough to become a novelty like Therizinosaurus or a nkYlos, a urus, dottle. Stealthy. It was real, but it wasn't marketable. At least, not yet. A dinosaur without a name. Here's another problem. Branding. Pop culture loves simple, powerful names. Tyrannosaurus rex, raptor, spinosaurus. Short, punchy, memorable. But our predator? The genera associated with it have names like Megaraptor, which sounds like a cheesy sci-fi monster. Australovenator, a mouthful with no menace. Orcaraptor, strangely Tolkien-esque. Aerostean, technical and forgettable. There's no clear star name to attach the fear to, and because the fossil record is fragmented, no one genus has emerged as the definitive representative of this predator type. That makes it hard for storytellers, especially in visual media, to build a compelling, singular image around it. It's not just a monster. It's a category, still being defined. And categories don't sell movie tickets. Characters do. Too real for fiction. This might sound ironic, but one of the biggest obstacles this dinosaur faces is that it's too grounded in science. Unlike T-Rex, which we often exaggerate into a roaring, super-powered beast, or Spinosaurus, which has been reinvented multiple times for dramatic effect. This predator doesn't need embellishment. Its claws are already absurdly large. Its hunting style is already terrifying. Its intelligence is already unnerving. In other words, the real version is already scarier than fiction. But that scares off creatives, because how do you dramatize a dinosaur that doesn't fit the expected visual tropes? It doesn't have giant teeth. It doesn't rely on brute strength. It thinks. It waits. It strikes. It's closer to a panther or a leopard than a Godzilla-style brute. That level of nuance is harder to animate, harder to write, harder to sell. And so it gets passed over again and again for flashier, simpler dinosaurs. The underdog of dinosaur culture. There's another element here, too, and it's a deeply human one. We love an underdog once we know its story, but our predator never got a chance to tell its story because it was misclassified, overlooked, buried in obscurity. A footnote in fossil catalogs. So unlike Velociraptor, which rode the wave of pop science from day one, or T-Rex, which has always been center stage, this dinosaur was barely mentioned in children's books, classroom posters, or museum exhibitions. No toys, no cartoons, no Halloween costumes. Without a presence in early education, it never entered the cultural bloodstream. And by the time science caught up, pop culture had already moved on. A new era. Its time is coming, but here's the twist. That invisibility? It might be exactly what this predator needs, because now, as scientific accuracy becomes more valued in media, as documentaries lean into realism and paleontology gets more airtime, as audiences ask for new dinosaurs, not just rehashed legends, this predator is perfectly positioned to explode into relevance. It's mysterious, it's underused, it's deadly, and it has an air of realism that makes it all the more compelling. Imagine a new documentary dramatizing a dense prehistoric jungle, a low mist, prey grazing quietly. And then a blur of feathers, a flash of claws. No roar, just a sudden, clinical strike. Silence returns. That's a moment no audience forgets, and it's one that no other dinosaur can quite deliver, because only this one, this stealth-adapted, evolution-honed, near-invisible predator, was made for that kind of fear. Not loud, not massive. But inevitable, from obscurity to icon. The final irony is this. This dinosaur might soon become famous because it was forgotten. Its story of being misclassified, ignored, nearly lost, is cinematic in its own right. Audiences love rediscovering what others missed. The underdog narrative, the hidden monster, the real killer in a world of distractions. It has all the ingredients of a breakout star. And if it does finally claim the spotlight in a movie, a game, a viral clip, it won't be because it was invented by storytellers. It will be because the truth finally caught up, because we finally listened to the fossils. It was too dangerous to ignore, even for pop culture. Asterisk. Chapter 18: Modern Technology. Ancient killer. Imagine holding a fossil claw in your hand. Something ancient, curved, impossibly sharp. You can feel its weight. Study its ridges. See the grooves where blood vessels once ran. But what you can't see is how it moved, how it flexed, how fast it struck, how much force it delivered. That's where the story used to end. For decades, fossils gave us only static truths, shapes frozen in stone. Pieces of creatures that once breathed, hunted, survived. But now, with the rise of modern technology, we're finally breathing life back into bones. And this particular predator, long misunderstood, half forgotten, almost lost to history, is beginning to reveal its full, terrifying form. It's not just about what we found. It's about how we're finally able to read it. CT scans, seeing through stone. In the past, studying a fossil often meant damaging it. You had to slice bones open, grind away stone, take samples. It was risky, invasive, limited. But today, we have computed tomography, CT scans. Now, paleontologists can peer inside fossils without touching them. Want to see the internal structure of a claw? Scan it. Want to map the brain case of a skull fragment? Scan it. Want to determine if a bone was hollow, like in birds, or solid, like in most reptiles? Scan it. And when these scans were applied to the fragmentary remains of this predator, something extraordinary emerged. Its bones were pneumatized, full of air pockets like modern birds. That meant a lighter skeleton, faster movement, higher oxygen efficiency. In other words, it wasn't just built for power. It was built for speed and agility. A large, apex predator with the mobility of a raptor? That's a game-changer. Digital reconstruction, rebuilding the killer CT data, doesn't just sit on a screen. It becomes the foundation for digital reconstructions, detailed 3D models of what the dinosaur looked like, how it moved, and even how it killed. Researchers can now recreate full limb movements from just a few bones, estimate muscle mass based on attachment points, simulate walking, running, slashing, or gripping. Behavior. Run physics-based models to determine impact force and strike speed using these tools. Paleontologists recreated the hand of this predator. They modeled the joints, the flexion range, the orientation of the claws. The result? A grasping mechanism, more like an eagle's foot than a dinosaur's. Gripping, piercing, holding. This wasn't a slashing weapon like T-Rex's jaws. It was a hook for immobilizing prey, dragging it down, preventing escape. A raptor scaled up to car size, but with an assassin's finesse. Digital biomechanics confirmed what scientists had only suspected for years. This predator didn't just kill. It controlled the kill. Virtual dissections inside the skulls are notoriously fragile. Most predators crush them. Time distorts them. Fossilization warps them. But what we do have, partial snouts, brain cases, jaws, is now being studied like never before. With micro-CT scans, paleontologists are digitally peeling away layers of fossil skulls to analyze the internal cavities. And inside those brain cases, they found large olfactory bulbs, indicating an excellent sense of smell. Well-developed optic lobes, vision sharp, enough to detect the flick of a tail in dense underbrush, and a balance system tuned for fast movement. Add it all up, And what emerges isn't brute instinct, it's sensory precision. A hunter that could track by scent, strike by sight, and adjust in real time, not with lumbering power, but coordinated fluidity. This was no blind monster. It was an apex tactician. Muscle. Mapping. The power behind the strike. Once we understand the bones, we can begin to map what sat on top of them. Using attachment points and comparisons to modern animals, researchers are building digital muscle reconstructions of this predator's arms, legs, and torso. They estimate 4 limbs strong enough to hold down struggling prey, legs built for bursts of speed, not marathon chases, a tail that acted like a counterweight, keeping the body balanced during quick lunges or turns. And when they model it all together, you get a picture of an animal built not just to kill, but to do so in tight spaces, with rapid bursts of motion, and without wasted effort. Think of a big cat, the way it coils before a pounce. Now scale that up. Add feathers, add 6-inch claws, you're getting close. Bite force versus claw force. One of the questions that modern tech helped solve is this: why weren't the jaws more powerful? Why would a predator this size rely on claws instead? It's a counterintuitive question, because we're used to thinking of apex predators with devastating bites. T-Rex had one of the strongest bite forces in history. Carcharodontosaurus had blades for teeth. But this predator? Its jaws were relatively weak, designed for quick bites, not crushing power. So scientists modeled the claw force instead. What they found was stunning. In terms of puncture pressure, the claws could rival the bite force of mid-sized predators. And more importantly, they could be used multiple times, with speed and precision. While the animal stayed balanced and alert, the jaws were for finishing the kill. The claws were for making it. Environmental modeling, where it hunted technology doesn't stop at bones. Now, we use GIS mapping, climate modeling, and paleo-environmental reconstructions to build entire virtual worlds, the landscapes this predator once ruled. From sediment cores, fossilized pollen, and isotopic signatures, scientists can infer dense forest cover, seasonal rainfall, river systems, and delta's temperature and humidity patterns. And when you drop our predator into that world, it makes perfect sense. It wasn't designed for open plains or long pursuits. It was made for ambush, for navigating terrain that hid it until the moment it chose to strike. Technology doesn't just tell us what it was. It tells us why it was. Hybrid blueprint. What emerges from all this technology is something breathtaking. Creature that was as fast and agile as a dromaeosaurus, large and commanding as an early tyrannosaurus, precise and sensory aware as a bird of prey, as elusive as a ghost in the forest. It's not a crossbreed. It's not a prototype. It's an apex predator by design, not through size or brutality alone, but through adaptation, specialization, and stealth. And for years, we never saw the full picture, because we were looking with the wrong tools. Now, we're finally seeing it in 3 dimensions. Ancient killer. Modern mind. What technology ultimately gives us isn't just data. It's a mirror. We look into the past and see how little we knew, how many assumptions we made, how many stories we missed. This predator teaches us that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in the undergrowth. Sometimes it moves like wind. Sometimes it leaves only a few bones and dares us to fill in the rest. But with today's tools, from CT scans to digital modeling to neural simulation, we're meeting the challenge. And every new image, every new model, every new reconstruction brings us closer to the full truth. This dinosaur isn't just being discovered, it's being resurrected. 1 pixel, 1 scan, 1 terrifying step at a time. Chapter 19. The name you've never heard, the identity that slipped through time for most of this journey. We've walked alongside a ghost, a predator whose bones we've traced, whose claws we've measured, whose story we've painstakingly reconstructed. But all this time, we've hesitated to name it. Not because we didn't want to, but because for decades, no one could. It was a creature misclassified, misunderstood, scattered across continents, and mislabeled in museum drawers. No single skull, no complete skeleton, no grand unveiling. Instead, we had fragments, claws, vertebrae, teeth, parts of arms, and ribs, each one whispering of a killer that didn't belong to any known family. But eventually, the clues became impossible to ignore. The massive claws, the feathered traces, the hollow bones, the bird-like chest, they didn't point to the dinosaurs we thought we knew. They pointed to something else, something new. And then, finally, it was given a name, Megaraptor, the giant thief. It's a name that evokes raptors like Velociraptor, sleek pack hunters made famous by cinema. But in truth, Megaraptor wasn't just a supersized raptor. It was a predator that belonged to an entirely new lineage, one that we didn't even know existed until modern technology and reanalysis brought it into focus. It wasn't alone either. Soon more names appeared: Australopithecus, Orcaraptor, Arostean. Each a cousin in a shadowy family of predators that shared a terrifying set of traits: long claws, lightweight skeletons, powerful forelimbs, and intelligence built into their very anatomy. For years, these names floated beneath the surface of paleontology, unknown to the public and ignored by pop culture. While children learned about T-Rex and Spinosaurus, Megaraptorans remained hidden in textbooks and specialist journals. But make no mistake, this was no minor discovery. This was a new dynasty of predators, one that slipped beneath our radar simply because it refused to fit the mold of a traditional monster. Why we forgot. And why it matters asterisk. So why haven't you heard its name before? Why hasn't Megaraptor taken its place beside Allosaurus and Giganotosaurus on museum walls or in dinosaur documentaries? Part of the answer lies in its fragmented fossil record. Unlike the Titanic skeletons of T-Rex, we don't have a complete Megaraptor to mount. We have pieces, haunting, powerful pieces, but not the full creature. Another reason? Timing. It was discovered and named in a period when public interest was still laser-focused on Jurassic Park icons. And without a dramatic reveal or a sensational nickname, it was easy to overlook. Even its name, Giant Thief, misled people into thinking it was just a big raptor, not realizing it was something far more unique. But now, that silence is breaking. Paleontologists are finally stitching together what this creature truly was. And as they do, a darker realization emerges. We came dangerously close to never knowing it existed. Had its claws been dismissed again, had its bones been buried deeper, this predator might have remained a myth, a footnote in fossil catalogs. But it didn't. It waited, hidden in stone, for technology to catch up, for someone to notice, for someone to ask, what is this? And now that we do know, we can never unsee it. The name is Megaraptor. You won't find it in every children's book or see it rampaging across the screen, but you'll remember it now. Not because it was loud, not because it was flashy, but because it was real and because it nearly vanished before it had a chance to be feared. The deadliest names aren't always the ones we know best. Sometimes the most terrifying predator of them all is the one you almost missed. Chapter 20, the new apex predator. We've walked through the shadowed forests of the Cretaceous. We've studied claws as long as butchers' knives, scanned ancient skulls with modern tools, and uncovered the ghostly trail of a killer hidden in plain sight. And now at the end of this story, one question still hangs in the air, quietly, insistently. Was Megaraptor, or one of its kin, the most dangerous dinosaur we've never heard of? Or was it the most dangerous dinosaur, period? It's a bold claim. After all, the throne has long been claimed by titans. Tyrannosaurus rex, the bone crusher. Giganotosaurus, the wide-jawed giant. Spinosaurus, the sail-backed aquatic stalker. These were beasts that dominated their ecosystems and captured human imagination for over a century. But what if the metrics we've used to define apex predator are flawed? What if we focus too much on size, weight, and brute force, and not enough on the factors that truly determine a top-tier killer? Speed, precision, intelligence, evolutionary refinement, specialization. By those metrics, our unnamed killer, whether we label it Megaraptor, Australopithecus, or simply a yet unnamed giant among the Megaraptoridae, begins to stand apart. And stand above. Not the strongest, but the most evolved? Let's start with the obvious. No, this predator wasn't the biggest. It didn't weigh as much as T-Rex. It didn't tower like Spinosaurus. It didn't have the bone saw teeth of Carcharodontosaurus. But power alone doesn't make an apex predator. Instead, this dinosaur evolved along an entirely different path, one based on optimization. Not overkill. It had lightweight bones, but immense gripping strength. It had precision claws instead of bone-crushing jaws. It was fast, agile, likely feathered, and hunted in densely wooded environments where stealth and timing mattered more than mass. It wasn't a sledgehammer. It was a scalpel, and in nature, the scalpel often cuts deeper. Intelligence. In a forest of killers, a key trait that separates Megaraptor from other carnivores is its brain, or at least the parts we've been able to reconstruct. It had a proportionally large brain case, with pronounced optic lobes for vision and an advanced balance system. It likely had excellent hearing, possibly even refined olfactory ability. This wasn't a mindless predator. This was a thinking hunter. It may have stalked prey like a leopard, using cover, timing, and movement to its advantage. It could have operated solo, or even in loose packs, a behavior hinted at by fossil sites containing multiple individuals. And that possibility alone changes everything. A dinosaur that could coordinate? That's not just dangerous. That's apex. Comparative kill efficiency. Let's ask a more specific question. How efficient was this dinosaur at killing? T-Rex had enormous jaw pressure, enough to crush bone in a single bite. But it lacked agility and had tiny, nearly useless arms. Spinosaurus likely specialized in aquatic prey, meaning its apex role was niche, not general. Carcharodontosaurus had enormous size and deadly jaws, but limited evidence of behavioral complexity. Now compare that to our predator. Claws capable of puncturing armor and pinning prey forelimbs. Strong enough to hold and manipulate speed to chase and maneuver, sensory systems tuned for targeting and complex terrain, light skeletal build for endurance and acceleration. Probable intelligence to adapt to changing scenarios. This wasn't just a killer. It was a weapon system. Evolution's version of a guided missile. And every aspect of its anatomy served that purpose. The ecosystem test. Was it dominant? Another test of apex status is whether an animal dominated its environment. Did this predator rule its world? In Patagonia, where many Megaraptorid fossils have been found, it shared space with other large carnivores, including early abelisaurids and massive carcharodontos. But what's telling is how consistently Megaraptorids appear in fossil strata after the extinction or decline of those rivals. They weren't wiped out. They outlasted. They adapted, and that's what makes them so deadly. They didn't just kill well, they survived long after other giants had fallen. They became apex by attrition, slipping into top predator roles, not with brute takeover, but with subtle dominance over time. The real reason we almost missed it. The most haunting aspect of this story is that we nearly missed it entirely. Not because the bones weren't there, but because we were looking for the wrong thing. We expected big jaws. We expected size and spectacle. And so we overlooked the creature that didn't roar, didn't tower, but killed anyway. It's a metaphor, really. A reflection of how we often mistake loudness for danger and flashiness for power. But the deadliest predators in history, they're rarely the ones that announce themselves. They're the ones who evolve in silence. The ones who stalk. The ones who let you think they're not a threat. Until they are. So, was this the apex predator? Yes. In many ways. Yes. Not because it was the biggest. Not because it was the strongest, but because it was the most refined. It was evolution's answer to the question, how do you build the perfect terrestrial predator for a dense, competitive, ever-changing world? And that answer wasn't T-Rex. It wasn't SPINOS, a URUs. It was the clawed shadow in the trees, the name you never knew, the killer we almost forgot, the most dangerous dinosaur. Wasn't the one that roared the loudest. It was the one that never had to.